Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories. Welcome back to So Here's My Story. I'm Jodi.
I'm Eliot.
And at the time that this will come out, it will be Halloween.
Yes, it is. Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween. That's my Halloween voice, apparently.
It's very nice.
Are you dressing up today at all?
I'm on Halloween. I actually start a trial, so my
so you're
gut
dressing
reaction,
up as a lawyer?
My gut reaction is in the circuit court for Carroll County, they don't really like the lawyers to dress in costume.
That's kind of a bummer.
It is. Maybe if it were in a different jurisdiction, but yeah.
I'm not, okay.
I think Carroll County's tough on lawyers coming as, I don't know, zombies or something.
Sure.
Yeah.
Although now I'm having lots of fun thinking about like trial correlated things that you could subtly but not so subtly dress as depending on what the topic. Okay, let's not go down that. Okay. We have other things to do. Okay.
Right.
So a couple of little announcements. One, we are working on a while back. I don't have to tell you this. I'm telling the folks who are listening. A while back, we recorded an episode that we loved, that we laughed hysterically. It was I don't know if I'll say it's one of my favorite episodes because I have some that felt more important or more useful.
It was a great conversation, though.
It was a great conversation and I enjoyed the bejesus out of it. But then after the fact, we were a little squeamish about posting it.
Yeah. Just a little gun shy about how it would be taken.
Tiny bit verging into the not safe for work category.
No, I think
maybe
it fully verged into the not safe for work.
Verged.
Yes,
Yeah. So anyway, where we're going with that is that we have decided to go ahead and prep it up, give it a little intro, and use it as some bonus content. So that will be coming in the next couple weeks, and I assure you, I think it'll be very entertaining. So that's exciting.
It is.
And if you have a chance, before we thank our sponsors and jump on in to my story, which I've already decided is my story today. I think I've been dominating the stories lately, but I have a lot of them. I would love it if you take a quick second and hop on over into Facebook or Twitter. Follow us on Twitter, like the page on Facebook so that we can get you news about this new bonus content coming out. Both of those you can find us at SHMS Podcast.
Excellent. Okay, so let me thank our patrons.
Please do.
And then we'll move on. So first, we'd like to thank Tom Loveland and Mind Over Machines, Cat's Copy, the architecture firm of GWWO, Herbert and Ethel Inc., and Mary Craft Staffing and HR Solutions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, you ready to go?
So here's my story. This past weekend was, as I was joking with someone, sort of joking, I think I felt all the emotions this past weekend, all of them in like a 24-hour period. And I don't think I realized it entirely until I was driving actually here in this morning in my car. And I looked down, there was a bunch of stuff in my cup holder and there was no place for my coffee, which was, really important. I needed a place for my coffee. And the cup holder was full of some things and I pulled it out and it fascinated me because I had two sets of tissues in my, that are like, I don't know how else to say it, but like memorabilia tissues. I don't know what the right word for that is. Like
memorabilia tissues?
I guess, well, apparently, because I have some of both.
They were in your cup holder.
They were in my cup holder.
Yeah.
And the one set is from Shore Point Funeral Home, where we were on Friday which is a little small set of, just a personal little set of tissues with a lovely little message on it. Because Friday night we were at a funeral in New Jersey for a man that my husband went to high school with that just died very unexpectedly. And you can just imagine how many emotions that brings up.
Sure.
Just the regular mourning as well as the sort of confronting your own mortality and how do these things happen? Are we old enough for people to die? Just lots of stuff coming up Friday. And then the other set is this lovely little package, like 2 or 3 tissues in this cute little bag with a ribbon and a lovely font that says "For Crying Out Loud." And it was from a wedding on Saturday.
I was going to say, it looks like, and we'll have to post the pictures on social.
I will.
It looks like it would be a wedding.
It's a little wedding favor.
Yeah.
And they had this beautifully designed little thing beside the tissue basket that said, "For all your tears of joy," or like tears of the good kind or something like that. It was beautiful. And I will also say it was one of the most lovely, not just beautiful in an aesthetic Pinteresty kind of way, but just heart heart-wrenchingly touching and meaningful wedding ceremony for a lot of reasons. But it was just really, really beautiful. So when I'm driving here this morning, I was reminded of a quote from a poem that you and I actually end up talking about quite often for some reason. And it's my favorite line from the poem, which is Rudyard Kipling's If. That, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and meet these two imposters just the same. And so as I was driving here, I was thinking about this, and I would love to talk a little bit about that dynamic, because obviously business involves every bit of triumph and every bit of disaster. And what I like about that quote is not the take the knocks with the high fives. It's that he uses the word impostors. And that is the part that I always have to pause on, because with the number of people that I talk to about what's going on in their business and in life, what I know is that some people are better at believing the bad stuff, but not the good stuff. And no matter how much good stuff happens, they always have doubt. Some people, and I tend to actually be a little bit this way. Like when good things happen, I'm like, I'm awesome. And when bad things happen, I'm like, oh, that was just a fluke. Like, it's just my own defense mechanism. And so I'm curious about and I would love to hear, I say this all the time, but I really mean it this time. I would love to hear from you if you're listening, like where you fall on this. Are you able to hold them both the same? And is that both as imposters or both as real, or a mix of the two? And just that whole dynamic of how you process the highs and the lows of things, what you do with them, how you make use of them, how you don't let them bring you down, how you use them to fuel you or motivate you. I mean, there's a million ways you can shuffle that formula and that deck of cards. And so that's what I want to talk about today.
And I think it's so interesting. I kind of see the two different paths. One is in terms of a meta view of business, so that in running my firm, I can have these times where we are just super busy, where, we barely have time to breathe. And so business is really good. And I'll think, okay, business is really good now, but what happens if? And now we've had this firm for 15 years. We've actually passed it. This is our 16th year. You have peaks and valleys, but I tend to think, well, I know that the desert is coming. Winter is coming, to you Game of Thrones people.
Winter is coming.
So I'll look at the real peaks as temporary, because I'm always fixated while the valley is going to be here soon.
Well, and maybe we just pause on that piece of it for a second, because this is something I have often thought about doing a whole episode on. And I do want to sort of hit on all the dynamics of that this can open up. But I want to pause here for a second, because there is a special kind of hell that I see people get to that comes after you've achieved what you were trying to achieve. And nobody sees it coming. Everyone's always freaked out about it. I now see it coming because I've seen it so many times. And it's this dynamic of that. And here's where the false security, or the false whatever you fill in the blank with that word is there's all this thing of like, once I get to X, then I'll feel Y. Once I build this much revenue, or once I get to this many employees, or once I get to this much income, or however you perceive your goals and milestones, then I'll have this ease, or then I'll feel this spaciousness. Then I'll be able to relax. I hear that a lot. And that can be true if you consciously steer that way once you get there. But if you are not careful, what shows up in the place of that intentionality is once you get it, then there's a terror that frankly is a more paralyzing terror, because I think when you're trying to build something, you can tap into your resourcefulness. Once you get it, then you have to keep it. Mm-hmm. And there's something really scary about I don't know where the next pit is, or I don't know, now that I have it, I have to maintain it. I have this many employees. I have to keep up payroll, or I have to what if the next success doesn't come? And it is I think it's more intense than what comes before that, because it's such an undefined terror. So I think it's part of what makes, the peaks feel not impostorish, because it doesn't quite answer my original question about the imposter piece of it, but I just had to go there for a minute.
But you do, you have the fear and triumph You have those things. And to a certain extent, you have to recognize both of them as imposters. So when, in your example, once I get to X, I will feel Y. Yeah. And so X is that triumph. I've reached this. I have my million, 10 million, 100 million. I have my 500 employees, whatever. Is that success, or is that an imposter? And if you feel this way, is that really...
Yeah. Well, and the reason I wanted to talk about this is as much as I love that poem, and as much as I actually lean on that quote a lot when I'm working with folks, I actually do not embrace the word imposter with it. I use it, but it doesn't quite land for me, because something, I don't know, I'm sure in this conversation I'll be like, ooh, I know what it is, just because I'm talking it through. But to me, it's the balancing out of like accepting both of them. And as you were saying that, I think what fascinates me about that, the getting to a certain point and then the fear of keeping it, and maybe this is where the imposter concept comes in, is that somehow imagining that the goal is to get to some sort of triumph and then stay there in a perfect holding pattern. Right. Whereas if you get there and say like, okay, there's going to be another fall somewhere in here, but that's just part of the process. There's peaks and valleys, there's ebbs and flows, there's dips and whatever the opposite of tips, whatever, rises. Recognize it as all, because what fascinates me about this topic of what happens when you get to some level of success as you have defined it is that fear of there being another valley becomes paralyzing in a way that, in my philosophy, my perspective, actually often can cause some of the next valleys, because you're not like what's the word I want? You're not as agile because you've got a white knuckle hold and like, oh, I have to hold tight on this. I have to keep it. I have to keep it.
Yeah. And I think that really, in a sense, the imposter is the sense of permanence, because it's not real. It looks like it's permanence. It makes you feel like it's permanent, but it's an imposter because it's not. It's fleeting. Oh,
yeah.
And so that's kind of how I think of it. So if you can treat failure as being temporary and not a state of being forever, and you can treat triumph as being temporary and not having achieved a state of being.
They don't define you. They're not.
They don't.
They're not who you are. It's that difference I've heard of. I think as Brene Brown defined shame as the difference between like I did bad and I am bad.
Okay.
But I don't want to skip over what you said. That word permanence. There's something, I was just doing some personal work a year or so ago, and that concept of impermanence was there's something really powerful about embracing the concept of impermanence. And I don't know if that will hold for other folks, but it does give you a little bit more of a like, oh, hey, look, we're having an amazing day. It won't be here forever. Let's enjoy it while it's here. And when it breezes on by, we'll be doing the hard work of what comes next. And to be able to confront downsides that way, like, hey, we're in the pits. Everything seems like it's just going to burn to the ground. But hey, that's just today. Let's keep chugging and something else will come next. That concept of impermanence, I think, is probably does unlock that word imposter for me.
So as you were talking about that, I was reminded of part of a conversation that I had with Chris Brogan, and we aired some of it. But I think it really fits here. So take a listen to this.
Cut to that. Okay.
One of the things that people misunderstand about entrepreneurship is they figure once you've figured it out, you've made it. But it changes so dramatically and so often that there is never really you've made it. And every entrepreneur worth their salt, their career is like a big saw blade. It's up, down, up, down, up, down. And you just have to learn how do you ride that better. And that's actually, I think I devote a lot more energy to managing and riding that saw blade than a lot of people do, as opposed to, sitting at the bottom or reveling at the top, because I just know that there's another bottom waiting to happen and another top waiting to happen.
Yeah, I think that nails it. Sort of like you said in the beginning, between I think it applies to the meta, and I think it applies to the day-to-day of business. And it really does come back for me to this concept of impermanence. While that was playing, I remembered this TED Talk that I love. It's called A Better Way to Talk About Love. And it's this woman, Mandy Len. I don't know if it's Catron or Kate. It's Catron.
This is the magic of show notes, by the way.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Christy. Christy Schmier is our show note magician. Although this time I actually knew the reference. Normally,
yes, you did.
Because I took a second to look it up this morning. Because I took a moment to look it up, because normally that would have sounded like, there's this TED Talk, it's about love, something, it's a lady, la-di-da, and the Christy would somehow magically find it. But back to the story. Back to the story. So it's about love, but it is not hard to copy and paste to some of these kinds of things, because at one point in the talk, she's talking about love in terms of impermanence and the potential value there could be if we looked at love. And frankly, I think of this as also as business relationships and frankly, businesses, which I'll come back to in just a second, as looking at them as like a collaborative work of art in much the same way that one of my kids' preschool teachers, we got this amazing art from them at a preschool age that would come home. And I said, I always get the best art from here. And the preschool teacher said, the trick is knowing when to take it away. Like when to take the paper from them, so because otherwise they'll just keep painting forever and fill up the whole space, and it becomes a big black blob of all the colors together. And it's similar that she says if we thought of relationships, whether in her context, love or business or having a company in general, as this collaborative work of art, that there can be a point where you step back and say like, oh, that's beautiful. It's perfect the way it is. Wasn't that great? Like, do we want to start on a new canvas, or do we want to just put that aside and go work on our own canvases? Or is it it's such a revolutionary way to think of it in my mind, and specifically the way I think it comes up for me, and it ties right back to this, the impermanence of the ups and downs of business, is when I talk to someone who at least wants to explore the idea of shutting their business down. As a very good friend of mine, Rick Scott, refers to it, business hospice. Like, when is it time to say like, you know what, this is good. And the thing that holds them, I think, that makes that conversation even harder is not having a good relationship with impermanence.
Yeah.
Like if it stops, that equates to failure.
Well, there's a lot of fear too.
Tons of fear. Absolutely. Absolutely. But how interesting it would be if we had a better relationship with ending things not necessarily being failure. Not that there's anything wrong with the failure. I mean, that's part of it. But this perspective of impermanence, that the things, they have a time and then they end and then you move on to the next thing. And it doesn't define you or even the company. Like, I'm just curious, do you think you could ever define a company that ended as not being a failure?
Yeah, I think you can, but I don't necessarily see it solely as, well, the company ends and that's it, because you could have a very vital company that continues and is multi-generational in its legacy and all the other descriptions you want to give it, but it's constantly evolving. We used to do this. And we're not doing that anymore. We used to serve these people or this market, and we're not doing that anymore. We're not those people. That served us really well, but now we're moving on to this in recognition of who we are, who we want to be, who our market is, how the world has changed. And so the only thing that may stay in one form or another is the stationary.
Yeah.
But within a dynamic company, there can be a strategic sense of impermanence, even while you're not folding the entire thing and moving on. Yeah.
And I do actually want to backtrack for just a second, because even the way I said it, it didn't reflect the way that I think about it. So I just want to be clear about something. When I said like, can a business shut down and not be a failure? It almost, even in that sentence, you can hear it. We're defining failure as like, it sounds like I'm trying to keep it from being a bad thing. And I actually wish that we mentioned Christy Schmier a minute ago, who's one of our team members that does the show notes. I actually wish she was here, part of this conversation right now, not only because she's wildly entertaining, but this is actually a topic that I've learned mountains from her and the businesses that she's run, is this distinction between really, like, she is better than any human I know at embracing failure in a way. It's actually something she struggles with, because every time she does this in any kind, especially in any kind of social media way, people swoop in to say, look, it's okay. You're not a failure. It's not bad. She goes, no. I'm actually like, I'm good with it. Like this thing failed. That's okay. Why does everyone want to make it better? She, better than anyone I know, truly embraces failure in the way that I think this poem is trying to say, like, nope, trust me. It was a crash and burn failure, and that's okay. I'm not like throwing myself out a window for it. Like and I'm not bad. Like that. I think that's the distinction that this quote feels so important to me is, as you were saying in the very beginning, is it me or is it this thing?
Well, and you know, I have to point back to the very reason we started this podcast. You know, and some of the incredible stories that we hear now that we've put the podcast out into the world are about the great things that arise from complete failures.
Right.
You know, the crash and burn, the learning moments. And sometimes they're not complete. Sometimes it's just, that didn't work out the way I thought.
Yeah.
But sometimes they're just crashes and burns. And that's where you learn so much from. And if nobody had permission to fail, let alone talk about it.
Oh yeah.
Number one, we wouldn't have a podcast, but number two, so many great things would not have been achieved unless the people who experience that realize that that's not who I am. It's just what happened to me.
Yeah. Yeah. There's I feel like maybe we've mentioned it in another episode, but there's a really fantastic video by Derek. I think it's Derek Sivers, Why We Need to Fail, and it's just it's over and over again all these really great stories and studies and examples of how failure is part of the process. But so we've talked a lot about failure. I do want to spend a minute on the impostor of triumph.
Yeah. And I'll give you an example.
Okay.
And you know that for the past several days that I was away at this public speaking, what they call graduate school, because my goal, I love public speaking and I'm good at it. But what I realized, I probably mentioned this before, what I realized is that I was like a good local band, you know. You know, a lot of people would come out and they're so deathly afraid of public speaking that they look at anybody who can get up on stage and is comfortable and can make them laugh a little bit as a great public speaker.
Right.
But I knew that what I wanted to be was not a great local band. I wanted to be world class.
Right.
I wanted to be world class in this particular endeavor. And so I've been furthering my education as a performer, as a public speaker. So it combines both of these, because when I speak locally, particularly, you know, chambers of commerce or what have you, I'll have people come up to me and they're saying, that was great. That was the best thing. That was terrific. And believe me, I appreciate that. Who doesn't like to hear that?
Okay. I call BS on that because you're crap at taking compliments, but go ahead.
I am crap at taking compliments, but I appreciate the sentiment behind it.
I don't for a second believe that you're like, why, thank you.
No, I don't enjoy it, but I appreciate the sentiment behind it.
Quietly while seething and trying to escape the space.
But I do recognize that that success is an imposter, because it's not the adulation, you know, if you can go that is an extreme, but that doesn't matter, because what matters is what I want to accomplish. And then when I go up to graduate school where you have really world-class people and they'll say, yeah, okay, don't do that. Or, no, you have to do this. Or, I just see examples of people who are doing this thing and geez, they did that better than I knew how to do it.
Yeah.
But I've got to then switch gears and say, okay, just as I wasn't the greatest thing since sliced bread when I spoke in front of the Chamber of Commerce, I'm not the worst thing in the world, some talentless hack when I go up and I see these people. You've got to learn from both, but treat those imposters just the same.
Well, so I think you just tied them together for me, at least in my head, really beautifully, in that the danger of, or one of the dangers of buying into triumph and beyond, I mean, and we did a whole episode on it. So, you know, caveat, you know how I feel about people taking compliments and owning them and really digesting them and letting them sink in. And so you can build on that foundation. And if you let that be enough, or if you let that be like the thing, I think one of the risks is it can very sneakily, because I don't think this is a conscious thing, I think very sneakily it can cause you to not take the risks that put you up for new, like I'm a good speaker can actually make you less likely, I think, to go places where you won't feel like you're a good speaker, where you have to face that you're not that good at this new level of something, which is a huge problem. I was trying to find it while we were chatting here, and I can't find it. I saw someone post on LinkedIn just recently something like, if you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough, you're not doing enough, you're not like verging into new space. If you're just sort of hanging out in the land of success, that it's not enough. Or not that it's not enough, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know what you mean, because if you're hanging out there, then I think that what you're doing is not success. What you're experiencing is stagnation, not success. Mm-hmm. It just looks like success because you're comfortable, and that gets back to the imposter thing.
Yeah.
And so I think real success is allowing failure. It's allowing the evolution. It's continuing your experience to the point where you've pushed beyond your comfort zone, and you've got to get comfortable with the fact that you're not the greatest thing since sliced bread at that particular time.
That's the word, I think. Evolution. Like, I don't think anyone, like, impermanence can bring up some fears. Failure can bring up fears. Triumph doesn't feel like it comes with fears, but it comes with fears afterwards, I think. But I think it's at least for me, the whole concept of evolution kind of puts it in I would never want to not be evolving and shifting. And that inherently includes some, trying new things that don't feel, that you're not going to be good at. B, letting go of things that don't work anymore. I mean, evolution is, if it didn't have that part, would be hoarding. You'd be like collecting everything forever. Yes. So I think that's a really important, just sit with that for a second. If you think of triumph and disaster in terms of evolving, whether that's for yourself or your business or relationship or your kids, I don't know, something about that feels really important to me.
Yeah, because I think then in that respect, neither one of them is a destination. Both are simply milestones.
Yeah. This feels like, I feel like we're using our very serious radio voices today.
That was my best radio voice. That was, yes. Well, not quite Tom Tucker from Family Guy, but it was
Oh,
close.
No, I was thinking more like the Saturday Night Live skit with the NPR, thank you for coming to NPR.
I'm going to write a strongly worded letter. Yes.
Perfect.
So that's our story.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so grateful for everyone who's listening in, and we're especially grateful to all of our patrons who've joined us over at patreon.com to support our efforts here. And we hope to see you next week.
And listen, having told our story, we'd love to hear yours.
Ooh, yeah.
So I guess what we're trying to say is, the floor is yours. Go to sohere'smystory.com and join the conversation.
Wait, before you go, there are 3 things that we really want you to know.
First, you can find show notes and links to all of the random things we happen to mention during the episode by visiting our website, sohere'smystory.com.
The second thing is, we like to talk.
And not just to each other.
That's right. So what we really want to hear is your story. So while you're there, you'll also find links to connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and other ways to contact us with questions, suggestions, or even to share your own story.
And if you love the show and want to support future episodes, you'll also find the link to our Patreon page where we share our extra bonus content.
Or if you can't support us financially, it'd be great if you could leave us a 5-star review at iTunes, Stitcher, or whatever podcast service you use to listen to us. And be sure to tell all your friends.
Until next time.